and welcome to GMBN Tech. Today is all about your questions, so if you've used hashtag Ask GMBN Tech down in the comments of any of our videos, then we can find it and answer them on a show like this. And I believe, Isaac, you have the first question.
I do, thank you, Anna. My first question is from Chelina, who says, I'm a clipless pedal noob. I've tried Shimano SBD and Crank Brothers, and it seems it's easier for me to release with SBDs. My issue is I find the Crank Brothers more comfortable due to the wider platform, even with easy release cleats on. Questions are, is there a certain way to release from Crank Brothers cleats, and which is better for MTB and gravel riding? First off, there is a slightly specific way to release from Crank Brothers cleats compared to Shimano ones. They have a slightly different mechanism that retains the cleat. Shimano ones, it depends a little bit on spring tension as well as the bars of the pedal, so you can pull the cleat out a bit by lifting your heel as well as twisting. If you try and lift your heel on a Crank Brothers cleat, the bars of the pedal just tighten up on the cleat, which is what's holding the pedal and the shoe together, so you won't unclip, so you have to do a horizontal twist. So there is a bit of a specific way, but I found personally I got used to this very quickly. So if you do prefer the feel of the wider platform, I might just use them for another couple of rides. I hope you get on well with them. The gravel and MTB thing, honestly, I think it's personal preference in what's available. They are slightly different, they offer different features. Shimano have the spring tension adjustability, you can back them right off or tighten them. And Crank Brothers ones, often you can swap in different plates to sort of raise the height of the platform of the pedal, and that affects how it feels underneath your shoe. You can shim your cleats up and down to get that mating really well on the body. It's up to you, honestly. I reckon they both have ones that suit both types of riding.
Okay, my next question is from Natalie Rodriguez, who simply says, what happened to the front derailleur? Well, drivetrain development happened, didn't it? So basically, in 2012, I think was kind of a pivotal moment because SRAM started to play around with 1x drivetrains, and they brought out the 1x11 system. And because of that, because there's no front derailleur, they started mucking around with narrow, wide chain rings, and also stronger clutch mechs on the derailleur to make sure that that chain actually stayed on this new 1x system. And then it wasn't long before they actually brought out the 1x12 system. And so the more gears gave you more range, and in fact the new Eagle drivetrain gave you effectively the same range as the 2x10 that we'd been mucking around with a couple of years before. So it kind of put the nail in the coffin there. And especially as removing that front derailleur basically cleared up the front, it cleared up the area for suspension designers to start mucking around with pivot placement. We certainly wouldn't have had things like the nuke-proof Giga or even the high pivots that we're seeing these days with the idler at the top above the chainring. You wouldn't get that system with a front derailleur. So 1x actually opened the doors to all of that. Not to mention that you get one less cable to go through the frame, one less thing to tune, and also one less thing to clog up with mud and generally annoy you, because I think the front derailleur was really annoying back in the day, and I for one am glad to see the back of it. So that is, in my opinion, what happened to the front derailleur.
Next up has got a question from Shaf Hamid 83, who says their current setup is a Shimano 2x10 mixed drivetrain setup with an 1136 cassette. Can they upgrade to 2x12 setup just by changing the rear shifter, rear derailleur cassette to a 1045 chain and a microswine free hub to fit that cassette? So keeping the front mech, shifter, the 10-speed cranks and chainring. My short answer would be I recommend sticking to one speed system, to be honest. You can get a 10-speed 1140 cassette, which will broaden your range with the 2x up front as well. That's going to give you a pretty wide range of gears. The reason for that is whilst 10, 11 and 12-speed chains, technically they do have the same internal width, so that's like the gap between the inner plates, it's 2.18 mil, so you'd think, oh, that'll fit on my 10-speed chainring, no problem. The most modern Shimano drivetrains, that's ones that end in a 100 or a 120, M7100, etc. They've got these chamfered ends to their inner plates that are designed to grip the teeth of the chainring better, basically improve drive and chain retention. However, that means if you try and fit that on an old 10-speed chainring tooth, it's not going to work, it just doesn't sit properly. So you have to get an old one, you have to make sure that's all sort of working, and then the front shifting, the outer width of the old 10-speed chain is 5.9 mil. Because the inner width is the same, how they've fitted all those extra sprockets in is thinner plates, so then the outer width of the 12-speed chain is 5.25 mil. It might throw out all your front shifting indexing, can't guarantee it's going to work, or if it does, it might be really inefficient. I'd stick to one, either go the whole hog, get everything 12 speed, or get a wider range 10 speed cassette.
Okay, for my next question, coming from Youssef Metabolism, who says, what makes a tyre a mud tyre versus a hard surface tyre, and how do I tell the difference? Good question. There are some easy ways you can initially tell. So for example, a mud tyre might seem quite spiky, so the sipes would be long, because what they want to do is dig into that mud, dig into soft ground, and effectively interlink to give you extra grip. And having those big wide spikes also allows the mud to clear really easily. If you've ever ridden through mud in mixed terrain tyres where they're quite tightly packed, then they do end up just like a slick kind of mud tyre, don't they? Whereas the mixed surfaces or the dry terrain tyres can be harder to identify, but generally they tend to be less spiky because you don't want to sit on top of the terrain and have less contact with the ground. You effectively get your grip by having more contact patch with the ground. But also there's something that you don't see, which is the compound as well, and the casing and the support in the tyre. So for dry terrain, you can add more grip to rocky, rooty, dry terrain with what we call hysteresis, which is effectively the tyre deforming to contour or to mould around the contours of the terrain and give you added grip that way. However, a nice tacky, soft compound is pretty nice on a mud tyre when you're riding over roots and wet terrain anyway. So that is debatable. I would say...
Because it could also roll slow in the dry. So it's always,
true.
it's like, yeah, there's got some good reasons for hard and soft compound in all conditions.
Yeah.
And then also like slightly more supple sidewalls can be good for clearing the mud if you've got a nice flexible tyre. But then, as you say, sometimes you want a bit of a stiffer carcass to support those tall knobs and dig in and act like a paddle.
Yeah,
so
but sometimes you want a stiffer carcass on the dry terrain because you're riding fast.
That's true, and there's more G-force in berms and stuff.
Exactly. It's
what
a
a can of
minefield. So I would say there are some ways, but really the truth is you've got to trust the tyre manufacturers and see what they say about their tyre, because they will tell you what its intended purpose is.
The next question is from Leanne Drinshan, and they say, I've recently snapped a lot of spokes on my rear wheel. The rim is fine and quite high quality. I'd like to get a new hub with higher engagement. Should I buy an entire new rear wheel or a hub and lace that myself to my old rim? Is that a manageable task for an average home mechanic? My key takeaway from it, I think if you're snapping spokes, you're probably riding quite hard. I would take the money you'd put on an entire new wheel, buy a hub, and then put that into getting the wheel laced by a professional wheel builder, getting a hand-built wheel. I think the strength, reliability, longevity that you get from hand-builts can't be overstated, really. It is certainly manageable to learn how to lace a wheel. I think we should encourage people learning to wheel build. I think for your first go on a rear wheel where you're clearly riding it hard, and there's lots to consider, like the dish, the fact that you've got braking and driving rotational forces and the lateral and vertical stresses. Maybe either consider building a front wheel or like disassembling an old wheel you've got and putting it back together or something like that, and get that fancy high engagement rear hub built onto your rim by someone with professional experience.
Okay, my next question from Bob Go, who says, how do I determine a carbon handlebar is in good condition? I can hear some creaking noises while I'm pedaling, but not sure the noise is from the headset or handlebars. So yeah, okay. Sometimes with carbon components, they can dry out and they can start to creak and click, and it might sound like a kind of cracking noise, which is a bit disconcerting. But it could just be that the components have dried out of grease. So I would say if you definitely think it's coming from the front end, then disassemble your stem and your handlebars. So take away the bolts on your stem, get those greased up, grease up around the stem cover when you put that over the handlebars, because that can get dry and click, and also try around the steerer when you reattach your stem as well, because that can also creak. And sometimes I've had carbon handlebars in the past where there's like a fraction of a clearance issue. It's not quite mating well with the stem, and it might need a thick grease or a gripping compound in order to stop that movement and give it a little extra oomph to grip onto. But to answer your sort of later question, how do I know? You don't know if you don't see a crack. You can go to a carbon specialist, however, and have it tested, so they can use x-rays to check for cracks, but you can never be 100% sure if it's tiny. So I would check out the grease situation first, and if that solves it, great. If it doesn't, try and speak to a carbon specialist, or maybe for the sake of safety, think about replacing it.
That's all we've got time for today, so thank you as ever for submitting all your questions, which you've been doing using the hashtag Ask GMBN Tech down in the YouTube comments and on the Instagram at GMBN Tech as well. We've been looking through those. We're getting a whole load more for next week, so thank you, and we'll see you next time.